we've got to have our antennas up on this initial call. We've got to be looking for opportunities to build know, like, and trust, to ask them more questions.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another Contractors Success Academy lesson. Today we're here with Kyle Hunt. Kyle, thanks for being with us, man.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Awesome. So for those of you who don't know Kyle's the kind of guy that you wouldn't reach out to him if you needed help with your home remodeling, if you wanted to redo your kitchen or your bathroom, because he's not a great home remodeler. But Kyle, what are you? What are you good at?
Not only am I not good at that, I shouldn't say I have zero skills with it. My grandfather was a general contractor. My other grandfather was a painter. And so I can paint. Outside of painting, I've got none of those skills. So some people sometimes confuse when I say I work with remodelers. They're kind of like, oh, they think that I actually have those skills, but that is not the case. I had worked for a remodeler for a number of years out after I graduated college and was taking care of their marketing, their sales process. That actually parlayed into managing their bath and kitchen showroom, their 4 bath and kitchen designers, got involved in the financial side of the business. And it was about 11 years ago, just over 11 years ago, because our 11-year-old just had her birthday. It was about that same time. I turned to my wife, Sarah, and I said, honey, you're a stay-at-home mama. We got 1 kid, another one on the way. It's a crappy economy here in Michigan. Not a lot of money in the bank to fall back on. I want to quit my job and start my own business. And of course, she was just saying, that sounds wonderful. Something like that. But she was supportive, and I turned my former employer into my first client and kind of weaned myself off of that. I've always been bent towards being an entrepreneur. And shortly after I started my business, I stuck my flag in the ground and said, I'm not going to try to be all things to all people. I'm just going to work with remodelers. And from there, just kind of brick by brick have been building that. So I'm a business coach for remodelers, and I really focus on 3 areas: the overall marketing plan, your sales process, which we're going to get into part of that today, and then also just helping remodelers understand their financials and their markup. Awesome.
Good. Well, this is exciting stuff. I've seen a wonderful presentation. Let's share screens and see what you got here for us.
Sounds good. So I love the concept of what you're doing with the Contractors Success Academy of just getting real specific. Let's not talk about the overall sales process. Let's talk about, or marketing, or whatever the case is, but let's talk about one specific area of it. So when you approached me with that, where my mind went is something that I've taught on and coached my clients on time and time again, which is an area of the sales process that I think is a little bit underappreciated, undervalued, and doesn't get enough kind of focused attention. And what that is the initial phone call that you have with a new prospect. So it could be remodeling prospect, it could be roofing prospect, whoever is listening to this, but the initial phone call you have with a prospect. And what we're going to talk about is what to do before, what to do during, and what to do after this initial call to make a great first impression. And I would argue that this part of the process is one of the most valuable parts of the entire process, where you are making the first impression. It is an opportunity for you to differentiate yourself from anybody else they might be talking to. It is your opportunity to qualify them. Your most valuable asset is your time. And if we are talking to and running out to see everybody and anybody that calls us, we're going to be chasing our tails. We have to protect our time. And this initial phone call is a really good opportunity to do that. So that's what we're going to dig into before, during, and after this initial phone call with a new prospect. We already kind of met me. I told you my story. That's my wife, Sarah. High school sweethearts. It doesn't get much sweeter than that. And we have 4 kids, boy, girl, Thomas, Piper, Calvin, and Annie. Yeah. Don't you love it how you go on social media or even this, look at this beautiful family, well put together, Mark. Look at us. How well put together are we?
Yeah.
You want me to tell you about yesterday? Yeah. It's not always like that, but it's a little bit. I guess what I would say is I used to like to golf, just don't have a lot of time to do that with business and 4 kids. Can you relate to that?
Oh, I can relate. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's talk about kind of the initial phone call. So talking about what we do before this initial call if we have a website lead, let's say you work with Mark and his team. Let's say you generate a website lead. Let's say it comes through whether it's Google AdWords, or you get an email with it. A lot of times it is super important, right, Mark, to call them quickly, right?
Absolutely. I can't stress that enough. Everybody wants the phone to ring, and then what happens once that phone's ringing? That's kind of an afterthought. So I love the presentation, and yes, when that lead comes in, you've got seconds. Absolutely.
Yeah. So yes, let's be quick with it. At the same time, when something comes through, to have a couple minutes to just do some, especially when you're thinking remodeling, something that it's not like an emergency. Like if I'm a plumber listening to this, I've got an emergency call. That's one thing. But let me just give an example of like a kitchen remodel. If we don't call them back within the first minute, it's not as big a deal as some other things. So there's some things that we can do. We get their information, we get their name. So sometimes we might get their address. Maybe we've got their email address and we can see it's at remodelyourmarketing.com. Okay, I can click and see, what that person's about. Got their name. So what can we do for a few minutes just to research that prospect before we call them back? So when I think of this, and I think of a few minutes, 5 or 10 minutes of quick searching, I can click on and search them on LinkedIn. So what would be the value of doing that? If I go on LinkedIn, I can see the type of business, type of work that they do. So it could be, the difference in how I approach the sales process for an engineer versus maybe a stay-at-home mom. Those are different. Those are different sales processes. So I can learn a lot by just seeing what do these people do for a living. I can see the recommendations. Do people really enjoy working with them? I can see how long they've worked at a certain place. I can see how long they've lived in a certain area. There's a lot of, I can see if there's any mutual connections that we share. So just from a couple minutes of clicking, I can learn a lot about them. I can click over and type in their address into Google. And whether it's I go to Google Maps and I can see the neighborhood. Is this a up-to-date neighborhood? Is this a dated neighborhood? I can zoom in on Google Earth and see, if they're on a tight lot. I can see if there's maybe an addition previously. I can see if it's a well taken care of neighborhood. And then I can also click on Zillow. And do you have that up in Canada, Zillow?
No, we don't. Not that popular here.
Probably something similar though.
Something similar, yeah.
If you're seeing my video, I did stop by Tim Hortons and I asked Mark if Tim Hortons still dominates over in the Quebec region, and he said they do. But Zillow, for everybody in America, just seeing like when the house was purchased, what was it purchased for? We can learn a lot about all of those things by doing a couple quick searches. And then something else that gets a little bit more personal is doing just a couple clicks around on Facebook. Now with Facebook, you're playing with a little bit of fire here because you can learn a lot about somebody when you click on Facebook, right? But if you click on my Facebook, you're going to see, okay, he's married, he's got some kids. Oh, he was just on a recent trip to Chicago this past weekend, which I was. You can just learn a lot about people. You can see mutual connections. You can see mutual friends, etc. So it's no different than when you're pulling up to a home and you're taking note of the car they're driving. You're taking note of the flag that's flying in the front yard, Michigan Wolverines flag, or what would be a sports team in Quebec, Mark?
Well, you got the Canadians if you're into hockey, and that's about it.
That is about it, isn't it?
If you're in Toronto, you got the Leafs, you got the Raptors.
The Raptors play. Right, but you pay attention to that whether it's college teams, whether it's local causes, you pay attention to that. It's a similar mindset. If salespeople in the 1980s had at our disposal the information that we have, they would just be going, "Are you kidding me? Like, look at all this stuff that you can learn about them." So when you have this Facebook stuff, it's not that you're going to be weird with it or say, "Oh, I saw you were in Chicago this past weekend," because that would freak me out. It'd be like, "What are you talking about?" Right? But I can be wise with it. I can have it in my back pocket. And if I'm a good salesperson, I'm going to use it properly. But I can learn so much about their home, about who they are, by doing some little bit of searching around, clicking around before I actually get on the phone with them. So no
liking any pictures or anything like that, right?
That would be a little much. But what are your thoughts on that? Before we kind of recorded, I said, I'd love to go back and forth a little bit. What are your thoughts on doing some research before we call them back? Anything jump out at you or?
Yeah, no, I can't disagree. I think it's something that needs to be done in a timely fashion so that you can get back to them quickly. Like you say, being in the remodeling space, it's not necessarily a dire need to talk to them within seconds. That said, do your due diligence, do your background research. I think the more context you have, the better you can make the conversation, just more relevant. It's about them. You want to get as much info as you can so that the notion of just being like a sponge and absorbing all this data, you just have a lot more information on who's going to be in front of you and how you should sort of position yourself.
Yeah. Marketing is getting someone who has a need to know, like, and trust you.
Yeah.
Someone has a need to know, like, and trust you. And when we're a little more armed with some information and understand who these people are, we're going to understand their needs, fears, desires, expectations more, and maybe even have some hints at how to go about the sales process or customize it for them. Talking about their home, you pull up a neighborhood, you can see other clients that you've had in that neighborhood. That's a good thing to think about even before you call them, because I mentioned a few times like mutual connection or mutual friends or clients that we have in the same neighborhood. Sometimes all it takes is one connection of like, oh, we've done a project for so-and-so. Oh, you know them? And all of a sudden we're off to the races. And that connection just built some know, like, and trust and helped us. So cool. So that is what we're talking about today: before, during, and after. So that was the before part of the conversation. Moving on to the actual during, the actual initial phone call, I wanted to share just 5 tips related to this. And before I even get into this, I usually like to mention this at the front end of it, but I'll mention it here. Maybe there was something in what I just shared that really kind of struck you of, boy, I never do that, and I should do that. Or maybe one of these 5 tips or something else that I'm about to talk on in the next 15, 20 minutes is going to go, wow, that's something I've heard before, but I'm not doing a good job of. Or, wow, that's something that I hadn't considered before that I need to start doing during this initial call. Something I want to just emphasize, which I like to do in all of my podcast recordings, whatever the case is just make sure that you understand the goal of you investing this time and watching this is so that you take an idea and you implement it. You have an abundance of ideas. You can click through the Contractor Success Academy and you can listen to my boy Spencer Powell. Who else is in here? Anybody else that would know? Right, Spencer, you can listen to, who else would I recognize?
Tom Reber.
Tom Reber. You can click around and you're going to have idea after idea, and you're inundated probably with a lot of ideas. So I just wanted to emphasize, as you're listening to this, try to just find one thing that really resonates with you, is a reminder, is a new thought, is a new teaching, and that you're actually going to take and implement. I just wanted to emphasize that. Anything you want to add to that, Mark?
No, action's key. I like that.
Okay, cool. So 5 tips, the initial phone call. Before you call them, so we were just talking about before, tip number 1 is to get in the right mindset. Just get your mind right. There are so many distractions as business people, as salespeople. So the thought here is, do you pull out kind of like are you driving around while you're calling this initial prospect, right? We talked about a little bit earlier of, this is your first impression. This is your opportunity to differentiate yourself. This is the opportunity to qualify them. There's so much that goes in the initial call. And I'm empathetic that we have a lot going on, and it's tempting to just pick up this phone and call it while we're driving. But this initial call is extremely important, and you want to be fully present on the phone. And I know everybody, I can relate to this. Mark, you can probably relate to this. Everybody can relate to this. When you're on the phone with somebody and they're kind of half listening, you can sniff it out. You can smell it from a mile away. And when you're driving, when you're distracted like that, 1, it's just flat out not safe. 2, depending on where you're at, it might be illegal. But 3, it's just not setting yourself up to make a great first impression. So get in the right mindset. Don't limit distractions. Put yourself in the right, proper frame of mind before you actually make this call. So
that's a great point, Kyle, and probably something that's a little bit easier to do if it's an outbound call, right? If you're getting a lead and it's an email, you've got the opportunity to go do your homework, do your background check, and all that kind of stuff. Familiarize yourself with the lead, the opportunity. Get your mind right, reach out. An inbound call, sometimes you're kind of on the spot, and we hear it sometimes. We're looking at leads, we're listening to some of the conversations, and like you say, some people are kind of half listening. You're probably much better off to say, listen, I'm in the middle of something right now. can I get your name and your phone number, and I will call you back literally in 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever it is. Give yourself that opportunity rather than just, hey, what's up? What's going on? Yeah. People, like you say, they feel that on the other end, and it's just a terrible experience.
Yeah. So it's great to answer the call. It's great to answer the phone, but what you just said of one that also is leading the process, right? It's not pushy at all, but it's elegantly leading the process of saying, I'm really excited to talk to you about your project, but I'm driving right now. Is this number your cell phone number? I can do two things. When I get to my destination, I've got a good 15 minutes or so to have kind of initial conversation. Would love to do that. Or do you want to set up a time even for later today? It's, part of you is going, boy, we've got a fish on the hook, and I'm talking to them. But to lead the conversation, to have them kind of explain the process, to respect the fact that you don't want to be distracted, people will resonate with that. Yeah. So absolutely, it's great to answer the phone, but if it's an opportunity with a new prospect and you're just getting ready to head into something, don't rush it. Don't rush it. When you rush it, you're not differentiating yourself. And a lot of times you're also going to book appointments that sometimes you're going to regret and be a time waster. Cool. All right. The other thing to just mention on that is just to be friendly and upbeat. Like you can hear a smile through the phone without seeing somebody. You can hear it. And you can also hear somebody that's stressed out. You can also hear somebody that's just been like my day so far today has not gone according to plan. As I mentioned right when I got on the phone with you, right, Mark?
Yeah.
Like this happened, that happens, but I am fully present. My phone is in do not disturb mode. My door is locked. Like I am here bringing energy. And it's the same thing that we need to do when we're talking to new prospects to make sure we are upbeat and friendly, etc. Cool. So that's the tip number one, get in the right mindset. Number two, make sure we're not shooting from the hip. Don't pull out a blank sheet of paper and just kind of ask the questions that come to mind, but have a project discovery sheet. Have a lead sheet. I call it a project discovery sheet, where you actually have the questions that whether this is you taking the call, whether this is somebody on your team taking the call, maybe an office manager or a person in the office, whether it's your salespeople, have a process for this initial call. So it can be just the basic information, and we're going to get into some of the questions that we would ask on this. Really making sure we're tracking, how did you hear about us? Making sure that we know, have you ever remodeled before? Let me share a couple of questions. Have you ever remodeled before? If so, tell me about the experience. When are you looking to have this work completed by? How long have you lived in the home? How long you plan on staying in the home? A lot of the usual suspects when it comes to this initial conversation. But when you have it in front of you, it just gives you, not so that you can sound scripted or sound like a robot, but it can give you a little bit of an outline to make sure you're not missing anything. So make sure we don't shoot from the hip, but we actually have a form, a process that we follow for this initial call.
Yeah. From my perspective on there, Kyle,
sure.
One thing that's really important, I mean, we use something like this here internally, and it's great because not only do we use it on discovery calls, but even thereafter, sometimes you don't have the opportunity to fill it out completely. So, you'll fill it out after the call, or you have subsequent calls. Regardless, then you've got a nice clear document. One of the things I do with our CRM here, I just take screenshots with my phone, upload the picture, and it's good. That way things, if ever the rest of the team need access to something, it's all there. So that's great. Another thing too is, like you said, make sure that it doesn't sound too scripted. Far too often we hear conversations that go something like this. Yes, hi, I was calling about some of your, was looking online, found you guys looking for some remodeling service, considering doing my kitchen. Okay, can I get your name? Can I get your address? Can I get your phone number? And then it just goes on and on and on and on and on and on. And now I'm not going to bash any sales courses out there. I'm not going to name any, but
let's name. Come on, Mark.
No, we're not going to do that. But I mean, we're on these. We're listening to some of these calls, and it's just totally. People are excited. They're in the moment. They're picking up their phone. Yeah, you know what? Let's call this company. They look like they do a great job. We've heard great things about them. And they're calling, and they've just got some high-level question, about cabinets or whatnot. And then they get this, here, fill out this form first. You know what I mean? And it just like kills the experience, kills the vibe.
And frankly, it also, like, if you look, a lot of people do that. One of the benefits of doing a little bit of sales training or a little bit of work as far as differentiating us marketing-wise is that the majority of your competition is doing what you just described. They're bland. They're not sounding upbeat and excited. They sound stressed. They're pulling out a blank sheet of paper. They're not organized. They don't have a process. they didn't do any research ahead of time. So when we're doing some of this stuff, it differentiates us, and it changes it from you look the same, talk the same, and act the same as everybody else, right? You sound like what you just described. It's not real, right? It's devoid of emotion. It's just like, fill out this form. No, nobody wants to do that.
Yeah. Take a number, get in line. I'll get to you when I'm ready, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's not good. So number one is be in the right mindset. Number two, have a project discovery sheet. Don't pull out a blank sheet of paper. Don't shoot from the hip. Number three, this is just kind of something as I talk about this of what's the goal of the call? And, the natural answer is, well, to turn this prospect and this lead into, an appointment or into a paying client. Certainly that is the goal of it. But just a different thought for you on this is if you approach, when I get on the call, I'll use myself as an example. When I get on a sales call with a new prospect and I'm thinking about what this prospect is going to mean sales-wise and revenue-wise and money-wise and how much I'm going to make off of this, that is when I'm at my very worst as a salesperson. It's just, no, right? But when I am actually approaching, which over the years I've just gotten better and better at this, to really get on this call and say, how can I best serve this person? Perhaps it's going to be with me and my services, perhaps it's not, but how can I best serve this person, to listen, to guide, to give them feedback, to give them ideas? If you approach the initial phone call with that goal in mind, boy, does it sound different. Boy, does it feel different on the other end of it. And it's one of those kind of subtle things of, you get on the phone with a new prospect and it's like, how can I best serve this person? It might be with us. It might be for me to refer somebody to one of my trade partners or to somebody else. It may be for me to educate them and just teach them about the process. A lot of different thoughts that can kind of come to mind there. But I just want to emphasize that your goal in this initial call is to serve them, is to guide them. I love the back and forth. So I'm sharing a tip and then you're giving some feedback on it. I like that, Mark. What would you add to that one?
Yeah, I mean, look, phone handling, I think there's a million things that we can talk about and points we can throw in here. We should probably be here till the end of the day. But on that particular point, yes, what's the goal of the call? I think it's the trap you don't want to fall into from the calls that we hear are sometimes, I'd say people who are maybe a little bit less comfortable selling, maybe not as experienced, they have tendency to want to run through a checklist or just overly sell. They're not actively listening. They're just, oh yeah, we can do that. Oh, and we can do this and we can do this and we can help you. And it's like, no, listen, maybe you're not the right fit. Really try to understand at the core, is this somebody that you can help? Like you say, can you really deliver value? There's that. And then something else, maybe a little bit more off topic, but if you're paying, this is more, I've got my marketing hat on now. If you're paying to generate a lead, and very often if you're, owner operator and you're handling the calls yourself, you know the value of that inbound phone call. If you've got a call center, if you've got people handling the phone, it's important to make sure that the team understands that you are putting advertising dollars, time, effort, people behind making that phone ring, and that every time the phone rings, there's a dollar value to it, and you don't want anybody to burn that. And so, yes, you need to follow a process. You need to have your discovery sheet. You need to understand what's your objective of that call. And it's not necessarily to get to yes right away. You know what I mean? Like follow your process. And sometimes it happens that a lead is not a good fit. And this is something that we hear a lot, surprisingly. So somebody will, I'm going to use, for example, someone calls in and says, hey, do you guys do bathrooms? And this particular company happens to only want to do really, really, really high-end kitchens. They'll say, no, sorry, we don't. Well, why would you hang up the phone on something like that? You must know somebody in your market who does bathrooms. Can't you send someone a pass here and say, hey, you know what? We don't happen to, specialize in bathrooms, but I've got a good buddy of mine in contact, runs XYZ company. I think it might be worth a talk. Would you like me to get you his number? Oh, sure. Great. And then it's like, you may get some referrals later on too. So that
exactly, you've helped them.
You've helped them. Yeah. And that's something that I think, like you said, you provide value, it comes back to you, and
no doubt about it.
You're also not wasting a lead, right? So
yep, no doubt about it.
Little tidbit there.
Awesome. So number 4, more them than you. You were getting at it a little bit. I don't know what percentage is the proper percentage, but I think 70-30 is pretty close. As you know, Mark, 52% of all statistics are made up anyway. Right? Oh, you like that one?
I've actually never heard that. Yeah, that's great.
You haven't listened to a lot of my content because I've said it about 842 times on recordings.
I'm going to use
but So the point here is, if the majority of the time on this initial call you're talking versus them talking, you're doing it wrong. You're not asking enough questions. You're not getting into listening to them and actively listening to them like you were getting at. So this whole thought of, 70% them talking, 30% you talking, that means you're asking a lot of questions. You're getting to know their project. I think another little tip on this is, they're expecting, when you call them back or when you answer the phone, what they're expecting is a 2 to 3 minute conversation. What is your need? Here's where I live. Let's set up an appointment. And if we're doing that, we're not differentiating ourselves. We're not qualifying everybody, and we're going to waste a lot of time. So to get on the phone with them and say, do you have 10 minutes or so to chat right now? I want to hear about you and your project a little bit. I want to tell you kind of our process and how we work and see if we're a good fit. That has a totally different feel and expectation than what maybe they're expecting. I think that's important, depending on who's listening to this. If you're a remodeler, leaning into that and making that a 10 or 15 minute conversation makes a ton of sense. For some of the others listening to this, take that and chew on that a little bit and see what that means for you. But even at the very least of just sounding different than everybody else and saying, do you have 10 minutes or so to talk right now, at least gets you out there to differentiate. So that's number 4, more them than you talking. And then number 5, this is a good thing to learn, whether it is for this initial phone call, whether it is at the end of a project that you just finished. There's so many different times to use this little tool. And this might be your takeaway. Right before I started with those 5 tips, I said, make sure there's one thing you're going to grab and implement and have as a takeaway. This number 5 tip of what worked, what didn't work. If I got off the phone of this podcast, if I got done with this podcast, we said, oh, thanks, cool. We hung up, and I took 3 or 4 minutes to think about what worked, what didn't work. And I just took the time to think about that. It is going to make me better going forward. So when you think of the initial phone call, if you just take a minute to think what worked, what didn't work, and what can come up with this is, I asked them if they could meet on Thursday, and he said, no, we can't meet on Thursday. We've got a baseball game for one of our kids. And I didn't even acknowledge that. I didn't even acknowledge the fact that I know HAJBA, the Howell Area Junior Baseball Association. I've coached in it. I've got kids that age. I didn't say, oh, are you guys part of HAJBA? And all of a sudden, by me just asking that little question, started this whole conversation about baseball, about the fact that I love baseball. Mark, you've got a baseball glove right next to you there, right? Like, there's opportunity, right? I see it down there. They said, we just moved here recently. And I just bypassed that, and I didn't say, oh, where did you move from? Like that's a what didn't work, because it's an opportunity where they might have been from Kalamazoo. I went to college in Kalamazoo. We started talking about that. They went to college from Kalamazoo. And all of a sudden we found a mutual connection, which just increased my closing percentage 7%. As you know, 42% of all statistics are made up. But you know what I mean, though? So often we just bypass. We've got to have our antennas up on this initial call. We've got to be looking for opportunities to build know, like, and trust, to ask them more questions. So this idea of what worked, what didn't work, it is such a simple idea, and it really makes a drastic. If you do this at the end of every call, if you do this at the end of every in-person meeting, if you do this at the end of every project with your production team, you can't help but get better. So it's a really simple concept: what worked, what didn't work. And it's one I just wanted to really hammer home there. Any thoughts on that one?
No, I think that's great. Yeah, I would agree that we have tendency to kind of skip that. Call's done, boom, we're on to the next thing. We're inundated with these to-dos and tasks, and we're trying to get through everything. And yeah. I think to look back immediately after the fact is great. It's fresh in your mind, and you can come up with something that you can implement next time around. Cool.
So a couple things I want to hit on. This is also kind of the tail. I think it's during the meeting, during this initial phone call, and also kind of as we wrap up an initial phone call. So we got before, we're still sitting in the during, and then we'll talk about after. But some of the other during, and we just kind of hit on some of it of what questions do we ask. I've mentioned a few of them. How long have you lived in the home? Have you done remodeling before? If so, tell me about that experience. Why do we ask that question? There's a lot that you can learn by saying, have you ever remodeled before? Have you ever had a new roof done before? Have you ever replaced your windows before? If so, tell me about the experience. That's the initial question. And then you might get a little feedback, but it's that second question or that third question where you say, well, tell me about it. How long ago did you have it done? So if I'm talking to somebody about kitchen remodeling and I said, have you ever remodeled before? And they said, yeah, we remodeled our bathroom. Well, tell me about it. And they start talking about, well, the finished product was good. We were happy with the finished job, but boy, it just took a lot longer than we were expecting. Or, what we thought it was going to cost, it all just change order after change orders, things kept piling up. I am writing that down. I am circling it. I am highlighting it. These are fears that they have. These are disappointments they've had in the past. And where do these ideas come from? They come from me just asking, have you ever remodeled before? If so, tell me about the experience. One of my clients the other day, it was actually I said it the other day, it's been several months now, client of mine out in Iowa, and we were doing some training on the initial phone call. And it was one of those where he had kind of a project discovery sheet. They had just gotten away from it. They were pulling out a blank sheet of paper. And I said, Bud, we got to get back to using a process when you call them, just so that you're reminded of the conversation. And we talked about this question of, have you ever remodeled before? If so, tell me about the experience. And this is my favorite part of coaching, is when I talk about that, I get agreement on it, and they're like, yeah, I've been getting away from that. I need to implement it. And then the next week, we get on the phone, and he usually starts out with something like, all right, Kyle, I'm just going to get this out before you ask me about it. And then I'm just like, okay, what is it? What is it? In the example that I'm asking about, he's like, all right, we had a new call come in, and yeah, wouldn't you know it, I asked the question, have you ever remodeled before? And we started talking about it. And before I could even talk about what they're looking to invest in the project or their budget, before I could even talk about our process and how we work, I learned all of it. They talked about how it really struggled when they remodeled before, how they had the design done by one firm and they had the build done by another firm. And there was miscommunication, It ended up costing a lot more. We over-designed for this project than we had. All of a sudden, we started talking about budget. And that one question all of a sudden just flooded into all kinds of information about their needs, fears, desires, expectations. And it just worked, right? So having these questions that we ask, what year was the house built? Are you talking to any other contractors? Tell me, the big one of just more of a statement, tell me about the project. And really taking the time to hear about their project. If it's remodeling, there's a lot that you can learn, that you can ask about. Windows, the same thing. Roofing, the same thing. You can learn a lot about asking a lot of questions, to the point where the way I like to do this in training for remodelers is you ask enough questions to the point where you have a kind of a picture of the project in your mind. If they're going to be moving walls or not. The age of the home. If there's soffits and they're looking to take the cabinets up, to the ceiling. If their footprint is looking to change, et cetera. And you have some projects in mind that are similar that you've done or that you've bid or designed. And then you can ask that question, what are you looking to invest in this project? Or what is your budget for this project? You ask that after you've asked enough questions, you have a picture in your head of what this looks like. And then a lot of times you might hear, I don't know, that's why we're calling you. And you could say, well, based on my years of experience, based on this project that you're describing, that's very similar to several we've done just in the last several months, you're looking at anywhere between $30,000 and $45,000 for a project like this. And then we can zip our lips. Mark, this is a very controversial question to ask on the phone call, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But to get, that's a question that when we're doing this initial call correctly, properly, when we're asking enough questions, we can ask that question.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it. I think it's great when you've qualified the way you have. One, you've differentiated yourself. Not only have you done a better job of really understanding what they value and what they might be fearful of, like you said, needs, desires, wants, all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
But you've also done something that maybe if they have spoken to a couple other contractors, maybe these other companies haven't taken the time to really understand. And I feel that, homeowners may appreciate that and say, you know what, this particular company, they really took the time to ask me a lot of questions. And actually they made me think of a lot of things that I didn't even think about going into it. So naturally they're more comfortable because, you know more than they do. You understand their problem better than they do. And if you can articulate it better than them, they're just like this. They get it. They get it,
No doubt about it. So those are that's a good takeaway of just even thinking through the different questions that you want to ask on this initial call. Taking a step back and thinking about that. I just shared a bunch of them. What else do we cover with them? We want to make sure they understand our process. There's 5 powerful words when you talk to a prospect. This is how we work. This is how we work. When we can give a clear process of the step-by-step of what's going to take place, it gives them such clarity. It helps them make buying decisions. It differentiates yourself. It makes them, man, these guys are organized. This is not their first rodeo. They've got a process. So making sure this initial phone call, we take the time to explain to them the steps that are coming up and give them good clarity on that. And then also just, what are the possible next steps? Either, you're going to proceed and set up an appointment. You're going to refer them maybe to somebody that's better fit for this. You're going to say, you're going to decline it and move on. You're going to send them maybe an email with some additional details and kind of leave it open until they kind of decide if they want to move forward with an appointment. Get clear with what those next steps are. And because the clearer you are, the more confident you are there, the more you can elegantly lead, not in a pushy way, but elegantly lead the conversation. So those are kind of the other thoughts related to during the phone call. And then just a quick thought related to after the initial phone call. Between that, let's say it's a good call. It is a beautiful lead that Mark and his team delivered to you. Does that sound good?
Yeah, it sounds great.
I know this is just educational and we're not supposed, but it's a great lead. It turns into an in-person appointment. Make sure that between that initial phone call and the in-person appointment, that they get a really professional, solid email from us. Thank you so much for contacting us. Our meeting is scheduled for June 26th at 10 a.m. If you have any questions between now and the time of our meeting, don't hesitate to reach out via cell phone or text me, whatever the case might be. In the meantime, here's a few links and resources for you to review. Have them, maybe link to a couple case studies you have on your website, maybe a what to expect at our first meeting document, maybe a page that links to our process, or maybe even like a cost versus value report from Remodeling Magazine. Nothing crazy, but just something that says, wow, these guys got a process, they're organized. And it's also one of those things that if you're on the initial phone call and you say, keep an eye out for an email I'm going to send you that just has some things I'd like you to review prior to our meeting. What's your email so I can send that to you? That can be a very easy way to get their email address if you don't have it already. But it's also making a little bit of a simple promise to them that you're going to send it to them. And it's like, wow, he did what he said he was going to do. It's a little thing, but it can really impact, and it's different. Most of your competitors, most all of your competitors will not be taking this nice step between that initial phone call and the in-person meeting. I think the big thing I would just challenge everybody listening to this is when you think about it, whether you pause it, whether you just think real quick about what we covered, what is one thing that you're going to take and implement into your business is the biggest thing that I would love for you to do as a result of listening to this training.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, these things are not, it doesn't require reinventing the wheel, right? They're all very subtle changes, but they can have massive impacts if done correctly. So, to your point, take action and, execute on this and reap the rewards.
Love it.
Awesome. Well, Kyle, thank you very much for that presentation. It was a fantastic lesson, and I'm sure the Academy members will get lots of value from it. Again, as I always say, listen to these lessons more than once. That way you can retain the information. Make sure you take action on it. Kyle, thanks again for being with us. Appreciate having you here.
I'd be curious if a lot of times you can re-listen to it at 1.5 speed or 2 speed. I talk pretty quick, so I don't know if they would need to re-listen to it at a quicker speed or not. But what I want to mention, you said the Academy members, and I'm like, what is this? Is this the Oscars? What's going on here? And then I remember Contractor Success Academy, and it all made sense.
Yeah, and that's a great little hack, right? Listening to audio at 1.5, 2x speed. So I do that a lot. Listen to my car, phone, whatever. Love it.
Yeah. So yes, that could be a takeaway. And then let me toss one more thing in. It's totally unrelated to what we're talking about here. But if they've made it this far, kudos to them. Here's one more tip. There's this program called Loom. Loom. Have you seen it? Heard of it, Mark?
Yeah.
It's there's so much technology that can be utilized during the process, but Loom is a way for you to see, you can have your video up there and they can be seeing your screen. So maybe this is, a revised proposal. Maybe this is an updated design that you do. Maybe you have the plans pulled up. So those two could go to a prospect. Maybe it could be plans you have pulled up and you need to give some feedback to one of your trade partners or subcontractors. I don't call them subcontractors. I call them trade partners. They're not sub anything. Right. Trade partners, and you can just record it. It is, or a prospect sends you like 5 different questions. And instead of painstakingly typing up a response or trying to catch them via phone, you can pull it up and say, hey, Mark, I got your note. I just wanted to go through this. And it takes you 3 minutes. You click a button. You've got a link that automatically you can copy and paste in. It saves a ton of time, and it's a really nice little sales and follow-up tool.
Yeah, very, very personal. People appreciate that. And like you say, saves them time.
Cool.
Good, Kyle. Well, thanks again for being here. This was awesome. Hope we have you back soon.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
All right.